When hauling cargo halfway across the galaxy, you get a lot of downtime to rest, relax, and get to know your crew, which usually means swapping stories or learning about the other species you're spending months with. My bunkmate is a human, and being the newest species to join the galaxy, we always had a lot to talk about. We both worked in the med bay, and I remember when we first met. He went on about how I looked like the dragons of myth and fantasy. That alone gave us a week's worth of content to talk about. Our conversation topics varied, from our species discovery of faster-than-light travel to local cuisine. I consider Mike a friend, and as friends our conversations got more personal and started moving towards topics less savoury. Okay, so we started talking about drugs. It was an enlightening conversation, and there were quite a few similarities between humans and the Wyveria. Our species both have a long history of smoking the buds of a plant that produced euphoria among its imbibers. I told Mike that at my coming-of-age party and how I was offered moongrass. After that I took a liking to it and only stopped when I began my mandatory military service. "Oh yeah, you can't be smoking grass when the brass is lurking about," Mike said. I laughed and said, "It doesn't stop some from trying." I'd heard stories of those stressed by military boot camp and sneaking off the barracks to laugh with the moon. "Oh jeez, that reminds me of a buddy," he said with a laugh. He got a hold of some mushrooms while deployed and had to hide the fact he was high as a kite when they got a surprise inspection. That's what started all of this. I thought I misheard and had to ask, "Mushrooms?" "Yeah, magic mushrooms. It's a psychedelic. I used them a couple of times in college. They're a wild time, man." I had never heard of any substance that produced the described effect. Even the concept of psychedelics was foreign to me, and I admitted as much to Mike. Of course we had stimulants, depressants and euphorics, but hallucinations were considered a sign of brain damage. That can't be right. Humanity can't be the only ones tripping here. I shook my head. Micah grabbed his datapad and started making searches, looking through a public database describing substances the Galactic Federation classified medicinal, prohibited, or outlaws and got nothing close. Okay, so that's weird. So there's like 50 different species that get high of similar plants and rocks, and not one is going on a journey? He asked. There's like 200 different kinds of psilocybin mushrooms. Peyotes, mescaline, I mean, fuck, it's not that hard to make LSD. It's then that Mike got a look and started to smile. "Transar, my man, we might be sitting on a gold mine," he said. That got my attention. We might be able to write a paper on this. If psychedelics are really that unknown amongst the galaxy, we could be some of the first doctors to discuss it in depth, he said, with that smile I knew meant trouble. But I couldn't back out now. I was more curious than anything. I leaned in and he took that as a sign to continue. "We'll be docking at Verve in less than a week. I know a guy there. He gets us a whole smorgasbord of psychedelic. We do some research and write a paper on our findings. What do you think?" Against my better judgment, I agreed. But knowing what I know now, I wish I'd let it lie. True to Mike's word, he knew a guy that could deliver what he needed. So he left the ship shortly after we docked and returned with a case and wheeled it onto the ship without a problem. He explained that humanity had legalized recreational drugs, so as long as they didn't leave his possession, we were in no danger. Or so I thought. The danger turned out to be not from possessing such substances, but from handling them. We were off shift and Mike excitedly started opening the case, revealing a number of powders, sheets of paper, and several kinds of dried mushroom. Not knowing what I was getting to, I approached this scientifically. First I grabbed the bag of dried mushrooms as part of this whole endeavour and examined them. They looked innocuous enough, so I pulled out my medipad and scanned them. I ran a simulation of how my body would react if ingested. Mike noticed when I went quiet, and upon seeing the look of horror on my face, he ran over and started reading over my shoulder. He flinched when he read psychosis and brain hemorrhage among the major results. "Okay, that's unfortunate," he said sheepishly. I didn't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't this. "Alright, well, we still need a non-human if we're going to do this right. What about Joanny? How'd she fare?" I nodded numbly, my mind still reeling at the information. I reran the simulation, this time for a tyranny. The insectoid race was famed for its constitution and ability to consume just about anything. Psychosis and brain hemorrhage, I half whispered. That didn't seem right. The brain chemistry was completely different for a Tyranian Dwaveria. I had a feeling and punched in another race before Micah suggested. A Sandan. A hearty race born on a high-gravity world with a backup for each organ system and near immunity to toxins. Just to operate on one, you need gallons of anesthetic. But I already knew what the results would be before they flashed on screen. Psychosis and brain hemorrhage. This went on for 20 different species, one of which was a lithoid, and it all ended the same way. What was even stranger was that it took the same amount to kill, no matter the species, between 2 and 3 grams. I tried this with each and every other substance Micah procured, and while some had additional side effects, it was a medical impossibility. Each race would see themselves go into a fit of psychosis and suffer a lethal brain hemorrhage if anything the human had was imbibed. Mike fell on his haunches, the wind taken out of his sails, as it were. This changes things, he said grimly. I'm less inclined to publish something before hitting the next port, but now I feel we gotta figure out what's going on. We stumbled on something big. I felt numb more than anything. This was medically impossible, and here we were, way out of our depth. I was brought out of my introspection by the sound of rustling, and found Mike getting into the mushrooms. What are you doing? About 4 grams, he said flatly. I'm going on a trip, and you're going to monitor my vitals and brain activity. We'll compare notes when I'm lucid again. I watched in horror as he pulled out a handful of the dried mushrooms and popped them into his mouth, only remembering he was fine when he grimaced and gagged before swallowing. I hate the taste. I have no idea why my ancestors even thought of eating these. Your ancestors? Yeah, my ape ancestors. There's evidence to suggest early humanity has eaten these things for millennia, he said. There's even a theory that says these things were a catalyst for evolution. I tried to get more information out of Mike, but it was quite fragmented as time goes on. But as it stands, there's a fringe theory among humans. Early humanity experienced a tripling in brain size over the course of 3 million years, an unheard of expansion in the greater galactic stage. The stoned ape theory persists that the consumption of these mushrooms changed their ancestors physiologically, neurochemically, and culturally, and was responsible for creating human imagination, art, language, philosophy, science, and religion. Mike became less lucid as time went on, and I had to keep reminding myself that he wouldn't die. I was relieved when he entered what he had dubbed the giggly phase. He laughed at the driest of jokes, and would often break into laughing for no real reason. What's so funny? I asked, following his line of sight to the nearby wall. Swirling, he half mumbled before looking into my eyes. He looked at me with eyes dilated almost completely and went slack-jaw. Whoa, you're so colourful. I scooted back as he reached a hand out to grab one of my wings. Mike was never what I'd call handsy, and his newfound fascination with me made me nervous. Are you alright? He blinked and wavered where he sat. I think I gotta lay down. I watched as Mike rose to unsteady feet, his balance that of a drunkard before he collapsed on his bed. As he lay down, he groaned and started rocking back and forth. I got to my feet and walked over to Mike's bed. He said he'd get loopy and would most likely curl up in bed. He laughed again and rolled over onto his back, looking up to me with a smile that was unnatural. Mike? He laughed low and slow, dragging his hands across his face. The space between stars isn't completely empty, he said. What? It's not all empty. The light goes on and on, but stops. But it's there, but it's not all there. There's nothing and everything. Mike, what are you... The Tower of Babel wasn't ours. Mike warned me that he babbled nonsense, but what he said still unnerved me, and I had no idea why. I'm going to go to the medbay, Mike. I'm going to run some tests, I said. I'll leave the medipad recording, just don't leave the room. In a moment of lucidity, Mike reached up and grabbed a hold of my arm. I'm fine, Trent. Go do what you gotta do. And as soon as it came, it was gone as his eyes rolled back into his head, and he collapsed onto the bed. Frankly, this whole thing scared me. But what really got me and made me question everything was what I found in the medbay. As a civilian cargo hauler, we don't have much in the ways of tools in our medbay, but we do have a gene sequencer. It's a handy tool if you need to identify a body from a few scraps after an incident. I had some of the mushrooms, and I wanted to see just what its gene sequence told me. Those mushrooms? The magic mushrooms that humanity has been supposedly consuming for millions of years, they're not natural. Their gene sequence bears all the hallmarks of editing, sequencing and resequencing. There's no way something like that developed naturally. Which means they're not native to Earth. Someone, or something, put them there. I have no idea what that means, but I think back to what Mike said about that fringe theory, about how human brains tripled in size in a short amount of time. I don't like the implications.